Jim, I just want to begin with sort of a question that I hope doesn't get people exercised. I hope just the opposite. All this talk now about partial meltdown, what does that mean if 3 of these plants have had a partial meltdown?
I'm glad you're asking that question because we use meltdown in common language here in the U.S. We talk about a financial meltdown or a kid that has a meltdown, and it's associated with the worst possible outcome that you can imagine. And really what we're talking about with respect to the nuclear rods, the fuel rods in those reactors, is really a range of different things. You know, imagine there's a candle, and you warm the candle, and the candle begins to deform. It gets to bend a little bit. Well, that's sort of a partial meltdown. And then maybe after deforming and bending, it melts a little bit. That's a partial meltdown. And then if it all melts and, you know, flows down as hot wax to the bottom of a dish, that's a full meltdown. But there are a lot of degrees in between, but none of them are welcome. Let's be clear, none of it is good, but the worst part, a full meltdown, is some distance from a partial meltdown.
Now, what does it then mean? We have this statement today that 3 of the 6 reactors have had a partial meltdown. What does that mean in terms of long-term radiation leaks, the long-term capacity to clean up this site, and the risks that are attendant to the design of this type of nuclear reactor, of which there are a fair number here in the United States?
Yeah, that's exactly the right question to ask, Elliot. And it turns on this. Does the containment vessel, that thick wall of concrete and steel that surrounds the reactor, is it whole? Does it maintain its integrity? So if it does, if it is whole, if there are no cracks, if there are no breaches, then you can get a meltdown, a partial meltdown like you did at 3 Mile Island, but that radioactivity is contained. If there are leaks, if there's a hole, a breach, and that radioactivity seeps out into the broader environment, that's the concern. And unfortunately, in the last several days, I mean, we've always suspected that there might be something going on here because of the isotopes we're seeing outside in the environment. But as of yesterday, we're getting these large amounts of water outside of Unit 2 that seem to suggest that there is a crack in the containment vessel. So that's the combination you don't want to have. You don't want to have a meltdown combined with a crack in the containment vessel, which is the last line of defense. Because you don't want that material to seep out into the broader environment. That's the danger, is really if there are problems with the containment vessel.
You know, and that's what we keep hearing. When these radiation spikes occur not only inside the facility themselves, but farther and farther away, that indicates that somehow that radiation is going through, whether it's the pipes in the water having absorbed the radiation, or the crack and it's getting into the soil. That the scope, how far away from these reactors at the end of the day do people now think sort of people won't be able to live? There will not be any activity for 10, 20, 50 years. How far out does that circumference extend?
Well, I think right now, you know, as with all things related to this crisis, Elliot, the real answer is we don't know. You know, in terms of high radiation levels, we're not seeing that except for occasional spots outside the broader reactor area. We saw plutonium in the last 24 hours, plutonium that may have come from the reactor core. Plutonium's a heavy metal. It doesn't travel very far. So I think the hope here is that that most of the radiation is contained to the area immediately around the plant. The worry is that either it gets down into the groundwater and then travels outside of the plant area, or that there's a subsequent explosion, a steam explosion, something inside the reactor, and then that, like Chernobyl, would then carry up material up into the atmosphere and be spread by the atmosphere. But so far, it's localized, and the best hope is that it will remain localized.
You know, Jim, it's been going on 3 weeks now that we've been watching these events unfold. Tell me, is the trend line going in the right direction at this point? I mean, we obviously get distracted by Libya and other crises around the world, but if we come back 3 weeks from now and say, have we solved this crisis? Are we more likely to be fully resolved in terms of the risks at these plants?
You know, I wish I knew. I mean, I've been talking with my colleagues and saying, well, what does the end game look like here? Because it seems like this is every day we have victories. Like today we had electricity is finally restored to all the control rooms in all 4 of the major reactors, reactor units 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's good. But then in the last 2 days we found plutonium in the immediate outside grounds, which is not particularly dangerous as it currently stands, but signals that there's a problem with stuff leaking out, and this radioactive water that's showing up in trenches and also in the basements of the facility. So every day is pluses and minuses, and you don't know what's going to happen next. You would like to think that we're on a generally moving towards managing this a little better every day, that something bad doesn't happen, but every day there seems to be a new puzzle, and it's not clear how it's going to end. So that's why there's uncertainty.
All right, Jim Walsh, thank you for sharing that analysis with us.